Was it possible for a childhood promise to return after 20 long years and change a man's life forever? Nicholas Ramirez stood in the doorway of his mountain cabin, his hand tight on the wooden frame as he stared at the young woman standing before him. The afternoon sun lit the clearing around them, but Nicholas felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The woman's eyes were deep green, the same shade as the forest after rain, and something inside him recognized her even before she spoke. "I came to marry you," she said in a calm voice, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I'm the lost girl you saved 20 years ago." Her words hung in the cool mountain air. For a moment, Nicholas could not speak. The world seemed to grow still around them, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Could this really be the same child he had once carried through a deadly snowstorm? The same small girl who had held his hand with such trust? The memory rushed back to him with painful clarity. 20 years earlier, the Colorado Rockies had been buried under the worst blizzard he had ever seen. Snow fell so thick and fast that everything familiar became a dangerous maze of white. Nicholas was only 25 at the time, strong and used to the mountain life. He was checking his trap lines when he heard a sound that froze his blood. It was the cry of a child, lost and terrified in the storm. He had followed the voice through snow that reached his waist. The wind cut like knives, and his breath turned to ice in the air. He knew no one could survive long in that cold, especially not a child. Still, he pushed forward, heart racing, praying he wasn't too late. At last, he found her, a tiny girl, no more than 7 years old, huddled under a fallen pine tree. Snow covered her hair and clothes. Her little body shook so hard, the snow beneath her trembled. Her lips were blue, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Hey there, little one," Nicholas had said gently as he knelt beside her. "You're going to be okay now." She looked up at him with those same green eyes. Even through the fear, he saw a spark of hope. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He had lived alone for years, content with silence and the mountains as his only company. But this child changed something in him with a single look. He wrapped her tight in his heavy coat and lifted her into his arms. The storm pushed against him, trying to knock him off his feet. His cabin was 3 miles away, but it felt like a lifetime. Each step was a battle against the wind and cold. The small girl clung to his neck with surprising strength, holding on as if he were her last chance at life. When he finally reached his cabin, he hurried to light a fire. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned and made warm tea and broth. He sat beside her, watching her color return slowly. When she finally spoke, her voice was weak. "Rachel," she had whispered, "my name is Rachel Cruz." Nicholas smiled, brushing hair from her cold forehead. "You're safe now, Rachel." She told him her family had been traveling west with a wagon train. The storm hit fast and she got separated. Her parents had been searching for her, but she could not find them again. As she spoke, tears filled her eyes, and Nicholas had pulled her into a gentle embrace. He promised her everything would be all right. He would protect her until help came. The storm lasted 3 long days. During that time, Nicholas and Rachel stayed in his cabin. They shared meals, talked in quiet voices, and waited for the weather to calm. Rachel told him about her family's dream of a new life in California. Nicholas told her stories about the mountains and the animals that live there. Slowly, she stopped shaking in fear and began to smile. On the 4th day, the storm finally cleared. Soon after, Nicholas heard horses and people calling Rachel's name. Her parents arrived, crying with relief as they held their daughter in their arms. Her mother thanked Nicholas over and over. "You saved her life," she cried. "How can we ever repay you?" Nicholas looked down at Rachel, who held his hand tightly even as her parents surrounded her. "Just be happy," he said softly. "That's all I need." Quote. But Rachel had looked up at him with those serious green eyes and said something no one expected. "When I grow up, I'm going to come back and marry you. You saved me, so I belong to you now." The adults laughed at her innocent words, but Nicholas had smiled and brushed her hair gently. "You just grow up strong and happy, little one. That's all I want." Before she left, she hugged him one last time and whispered, "Promise you'll wait for me. Without thinking, he had said, "I promise." Years passed. Nicholas returned to his quiet life in the mountains. He built a bigger cabin and created a peaceful, simple life for himself. Sometimes, by the fire at night, he thought of the girl with the green eyes and wondered what had happened to her. He never forgot her, even when he told himself he should. And now, after 20 years, she stood at his door as a grown woman of 27. The little girl he once saved was now a strong, beautiful woman with determination in her eyes. "You remember," Rachel said softly. Nicholas finally found his voice. "Rachel," quote. He stepped out of the doorway, his heart racing. This was the moment he never expected to see again. Nicholas stepped outside, his heart beating fast as he looked at the woman who had traveled across states and years to find him. Rachel stood tall and steady, her dark hair catching the sunlight, her green eyes filled with emotion. She was no longer the frightened little girl from the blizzard. She was a woman who knew exactly why she was here. "I never forgot you," Rachel said. "I thought of you every year on the day you saved me. I never forgot the warmth of your coat or the sound of your voice telling me I would be safe." Nicholas felt his throat tighten. "Rachel, you were a child. You had a life waiting for you in California. You were meant for more than these mountains." Rachel smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "I did have a life. My parents built a ranch outside Sacramento. I grew up strong. I learned everything a ranch girl must know. I learned to ride, rope, and shoot. I learned to survive. Many good men asked for my hand, but when I looked at them, I did not see my future. I only saw a promise I had not yet kept." Nicholas looked at the mountains that surrounded his home. "Your parents must think you lost your mind coming here alone." "They did at first," Rachel admitted. "When I told them I was leaving to find you, my mother cried for 3 days. She said you may not even remember me. She begged me to stay. But I had to come. I made you a promise, and I meant it." She turned to show him the pack horse behind her. It was loaded with supplies. "I brought everything I need to start a life here. Cooking pots, blankets, warm clothes, seeds for a garden. I even brought my grandmother's wedding dress, just in case you said yes." Nicholas stared at her, stunned by her courage. She had traveled alone through mountain trails that even grown men feared. The practical part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, foolish, dangerous, but his heart saw the truth. She had come for him. "You could have died on the trail," he said quietly. "These mountains are not kind to those who travel alone." Quote. Rachel lifted her chin with quiet pride. "You taught me something when I was 7, that the mountains are only dangerous if you do not respect them. I learned the land, the weather, the trails. I prepared for 2 years. I did not come here blind. I came ready." Nicholas stepped closer. "So you came to marry a man you barely know?" Rachel shook her head gently. "No, I came to marry the man who saved me. The man who carried me through a storm, who held me until I felt safe again. The man who promised to wait for me and kept that promise, even without knowing it." Nicholas felt the last of his walls weaken. He reached out and touched her cheek. "I never forgot you, Rachel. I told myself you were just a memory of a little girl I helped long ago. But I never forgot your eyes or your voice. I never forgot the way you held on to me that night." Rachel placed her hand over his. "Then let me stay. Let me build a life here with you. If you want me to go, I will. But if you say yes, I will spend my life loving you the way I have loved the memory of you since I was a child." Quote. The world grew quiet around them, only the wind moved through the pines. Nicholas took a deep breath that felt like his first in years. "Yes," he said at last. "Yes, Rachel Cruz, stay. If you truly want this life, I will marry you. I will build a life with you here." Rachel's eyes filled with tears of relief and joy. Nicholas opened his arms and she stepped into them, fitting against him as if she belonged there all along. For a moment, the mountains seemed to glow with the warmth of the setting sun. Hope filled the air like a new beginning. They walked inside together, and Nicholas lit a fire. Rachel looked around the cabin, taking in the single bed, the wooden shelves, the simple life he lived. She smiled. "It feels like home," she said. Nicholas watched her as she moved around the room with ease, setting down her bag. He felt a strange mix of disbelief and peace. All these years alone, and now she was here. Not the child he saved, but the woman he was ready to love. As night settled, they made a simple meal and talked for hours. Rachel told him about her family, about life on the ranch, about the suitors she turned away. Nicholas listened, drawn to every word. She had waited 20 years for this moment, and now she was finally here. When the fire burned low, Rachel looked at him softly. "Is this real, Nicholas? Am I really here with you?" He reached for her hand, his voice steady. "Yes, and if you stay, this is only the beginning." They sat together in quiet comfort, knowing the next days would shape their new life, marriage, building a home together, learning each other again. It felt right. It felt like fate. The night outside was silent, but inside the cabin, two hearts finally found what they had been missing for 20 long years. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Morning came with golden sunlight spilling through the cabin windows. Rachel woke in the small guest room Nicholas had prepared for her. For a moment, she stayed still and listened. She heard the soft crackle of a fire, the sound of Nicholas moving quietly in the kitchen, and the peaceful whisper of the wind through the pines. It felt like a dream, yet it was real. She dressed and stepped into the main room. Nicholas looked up from the stove, where he was cooking bacon in a cast-iron pan. His smile came easily, something that had been rare in his years of solitude. "Good morning, wife-to-be," he said gently. Rachel's heart warmed. "Good morning, husband-to-be." They ate breakfast at the small table, and their conversation soon turned to what lay ahead. "We should marry soon," Nicholas said. "Winter comes early here. Once the snow traps us in, it will just be you and me. I would like us to begin that winter as husband and wife." Rachel nodded, excitement rushing through her. "How soon can we marry?" "A circuit preacher named Donald Stewart rides through these mountains," Nicholas explained. "He checks on families living far from towns. If the weather holds, he should be passing by within a week." "A week," Rachel repeated, smiling at the thought. A week until she could stand beside Nicholas as his wife. The days that followed were full of gentle work and quiet joy. Rachel and Nicholas worked side by side to prepare the cabin for two. Rachel swept and tidied, making the cabin warmer and brighter. She washed curtains, patched blankets, and arranged the shelves. Nicholas repaired the barn roof, chopped wood, and cleared the path leading up to the cabin. They cooked together, laughed together, and learned each other's ways. Each night, they sat by the fire and talked. Nicholas shared stories of winters that had tested his strength and patience. Rachel shared memories of her parents, her childhood, and the moment she realized she would return to him someday. In those evenings, their bond grew deeper and stronger. On the 5th day, Rachel was tending the small garden behind the cabin when Nicholas paused beside her. "Look," he said, pointing up the trail. A rider was making his way up the mountain path. Rachel's heart beat fast. "Is that the preacher?" Nicholas smiled. "It is." Donald Stewart was a kind-eyed man in his 60s. He shook Nicholas's hand, then turned to Rachel with a warm smile. After hearing their story, his eyes softened with emotion. "A promise kept after 20 years, the preacher said. "That is a rare kind of love. I would be honored to marry you." The wedding took place that evening as the sun dipped behind the peaks and painted the sky in shades of gold and red. The mountains stood tall around them, as if acting as silent witnesses. Rachel wore her grandmother's simple ivory dress. Nicholas wore a dark suit he had saved for many years. They stood in front of the cabin, hand in hand. "Do you, Nicholas Ramirez, take Rachel Cruz to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Donald asked. "I do," Nicholas said, his voice steady and full of truth. "And do you, Rachel Cruz, take Nicholas Ramirez to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Rachel answered, her voice filled with joy. When they kissed, it felt like the end of a long journey and the beginning of something beautiful. Donald stayed for supper, then left the next morning, blessing their new life together. As his horse disappeared down the trail, Nicholas and Rachel stood alone as husband and wife for the first time. The months that followed were filled with love, learning, and shared work. Rachel quickly grew used to mountain life. She cooked over the fire, learned to track animals, and cared for the small garden. Nicholas taught her to shoot, to read the sky for weather, and to listen to the forest. Winter arrived with heavy snow, but the small cabin was warm with fire, laughter, and love. They spent long evenings by the hearth, reading, talking, and holding each other close. Their love grew deeper every day. By spring, Rachel knew she had never felt more at home anywhere in her life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear, Rachel took Nicholas's hand and placed it over her stomach. "Nicholas," she said softly, "we're going to have a baby." He stared at her, his breath catching. Then joy lit his face brighter than any sunrise. He held her close, whispering thanks to God for the blessing they had been given. Their daughter was born in autumn, when the leaves turned gold. Rachel held her newborn close as Nicholas whispered the name that felt right. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Hope grew strong in the mountains. She learned to walk by following her parents' footsteps along the forest trails. At night, she listened wide-eyed to the story of how her mother had been saved by her father, and how a promise made by a child grew into a love stronger than time. Years passed, and their family grew. 2 sons followed, and the cabin expanded with it. Laughter filled the clearing that had once known only silence. Nicholas and Rachel aged, but their love only deepened. They faced hard winters and joyful summers, always side by side. On their 20th anniversary, Nicholas and Rachel stood on the porch watching their children play. Rachel looked at her husband with the same love she had felt the day she knocked on his cabin door. "Do you ever wonder how life would have been if you stayed in California?" Nicholas asked. Rachel shook her head and smiled. "No, I found my true life here. I found you." Nicholas pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You kept your promise, little one." Rachel leaned into him, her heart full. "I told you I would come back and marry you, and I did." The sun lowered behind the mountains as their children laughed in the meadow. And the love story that began in a blizzard 20 years earlier lived on, strong and true.